When I launched my skincare line, he secretly registered the trademark in his name, then handed it to his mistress, who rebranded my formulas as her own. He said, "She has the face, you just have the work ethic." Clients left me. He told me to stay in the lab, and when I fought back, he smirked, "You signed the papers," until I found a clause in our prenup that said. When I saw her face on that billboard, I almost crashed my car. It was my formula, my color palette, my brand. Even the slogan, "Science meets skin," was mine. But standing there, larger than life, glowing in the afternoon sun over the 405, was my husband's mistress. Wearing my serum, my lab coat, and my company name, except it wasn't my company name anymore. The logo was the same shape, same minimalist font, just one letter swapped. My life's work, rebranded with her name. I remember pulling over on the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. He didn't pick up. He never does when he knows I've found something. When I finally confronted him that night, he just poured himself a whiskey, smirked, and said, "You should have read the paperwork closer, babe. You signed it all over months ago." And that's when it hit me, the so-called joint venture registration document I'd signed in our kitchen 6 months earlier. He'd told me it was just a legal step for expanding into e-commerce. I didn't even question it. I trusted him. He wasn't just my husband, he was my business partner, my investor, the one who'd said he believed in me when I was still working out of a rented lab in Santa Monica. Now he stood there, cool as ice, telling me my brand, my years of R&D, my blood and savings and hope legally belonged to him. And the cherry on top, he handed it off to her, some wannabe influencer he met at a launch party, because, in his words, "She has the face. You just have the work ethic." I didn't cry, not that night. I remember standing there, staring at him, and realizing he didn't see me as his partner anymore. He saw me as labor, a tool. A brain to milk until he could replace me with someone prettier for the cameras. And the worst part? Clients I'd worked with for years started dropping me the following week, claiming they'd moved over to the new brand. He even told me, "Just stay in the lab, babe. That's where you belong. Let her handle the spotlight." But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that while he'd tricked me into signing that trademark away, I had something stronger buried in another document. Something he never thought I'd use. A clause in our prenup. And when I reread it, alone at 2 a.m., my heart stopped. Because that clause, it changed everything. Before all of this, before billboards and lawsuits and betrayal, there was just me, a lab coat, and a dream that barely fit in my tiny kitchen. I grew up in Bakersfield. My mom was a nurse who used drugstore moisturizer and called it self-care. I didn't have money for beauty products, so I learned to make them. At 16, I was mixing sugar scrubs in old mason jars and selling them at farmers' markets. I wasn't thinking about money back then. I just liked seeing someone's face light up when something I made worked. By the time I got to UCLA, I'd already taught myself chemistry from YouTube tutorials. I studied biochemistry, worked nights at a spa, and saved every tip for lab supplies. After graduation, I rented a shared space in Santa Monica and started experimenting with formulations that balanced science and skincare. That's where I met him. He came in one night when I was staying late. Slick suit, perfect smile, the kind of man who seemed allergic to fluorescent lighting. He said he worked in investments, but he didn't say what kind. He told me he admired my hustle, said he wanted to help me scale. I should have known right then. But I didn't. I wanted to believe someone finally saw me. When we started dating, he'd bring me dinner to the lab, stay up while I tested stability samples, and talk about branding ideas. He said we were partners. When I launched my first line, small batch, just 5 products, he paid for the first photo shoot. I thought it was love and faith rolled into one. We married 3 years later. I was 31, and my skincare brand was starting to get traction. Local influencers were talking about it. A few boutique spas wanted to carry it. For the first time, I wasn't just a chemist with a dream. I was running something real. He handled the finances, the marketing, the investors said I should focus on the science. I didn't question it because I was exhausted and grateful. He'd been there from the beginning, or so I thought. But things changed the second we hit profit. He started calling the brand ours in investor meetings, even though I'd created everything from the formulations to the packaging. He said I was too emotional about business. When I pushed back, he'd laugh and say, "You're brilliant in the lab, but leave the legal stuff to me." That legal stuff was the trap. The joint venture agreement I signed one morning before a flight to New York. He told me it was just a formality for tax purposes. I skimmed it while rushing to pack. I signed. 6 months later, the brand I'd built with my hands was under his name, registered as his trademark. And right when I started asking questions, right when I started noticing receipts that didn't add up and marketing shoots I hadn't approved, she appeared. A glossy, wide-eyed 20-something consultant with a social media following and zero experience in skincare. He introduced her as our new face. But I didn't know she'd soon become something far worse. It started small, the way poison always does. At first, she was just around too often, showing up at meetings she didn't belong in, hovering during shoots, throwing out branding ideas that made no scientific sense. She called herself the creative director, even though that was never a role we had. My husband would just smile like it amused him. "Let her learn," he said. "She has potential." But potential doesn't smell like cheap perfume and sit on your husband's lap during product reviews. I remember the first time I saw them touch, not some quick accident, not businesslike. He brushed her hair out of her face while they were laughing over a marketing draft. I froze in the doorway of our office, my stomach twisting. He noticed me, straightened up, and said, "Babe, you're early." Early, for my own meeting. Things spiraled after that. He started forgetting to invite me to investor dinners. She started making executive decisions about packaging design. My team, people I'd trained, trusted, began going to her for approvals. It was like being erased in real time. When I confronted him, he sighed and said, "You're too close to this. You take everything personally. She's helping us evolve the brand." "Evolve?" I snapped. "She's gutting it." He smirked. "That's business." I started pulling late nights, locking myself in the lab to protect my formulations. I changed the access passwords, backed up everything to an external drive, and started drafting new contracts to protect my intellectual property. But every time I tried to take control back, he was one step ahead. One night, after everyone had left, I opened my lab fridge to find my samples missing. Every single one of my prototypes gone. When I checked the camera footage, the files had been wiped. The next morning, a new shipment went out from our fulfillment center under his new company name. That's when I realized he hadn't just been manipulating me emotionally. He'd been quietly moving the company, assets, suppliers, trademarks, all under his control. He used my work to launch the new brand with her as the face, and clients followed. The influencer crowd adored her. Magazines picked up the story. She gave interviews about her passion for science and skincare, quoting my research notes word for word. I started losing everything. Retail partners cut me off. My accounts froze because technically, the funds belonged to his company. He told me to stay in the lab, like I was some basement-dwelling scientist lucky to even be part of his empire. I tried to fight back. I hired a lawyer, the same firm that had handled our prenup. Big mistake. A week later, my husband suggested we settle things privately. That night, he leaned against the counter, drink in hand, and said, "You signed the papers, babe. You gave it to me. You can't fight what's legal." But he didn't see it, the flicker in my eyes when he said legal. Because that word sent me back to the prenup, a document I hadn't looked at in years. And there, buried in the fine print I'd once ignored, was something he had clearly forgotten. Something that made all his smug confidence suddenly fragile. When I reread our prenup, I expected to feel stupid. Naive. But what I felt instead was a pulse of something sharp, cold, and electric. Because there it was, clear as daylight, a clause he had insisted on including himself. It read, "Any intellectual property developed by either party during the marriage shall remain the sole property of its creator unless jointly authored." Back then, he'd said it was just to protect us both. That we were equals. That it was fair. Now that clause was the knife I didn't know I'd been holding. My formulas, my research, my designs, all mine, legally. Which meant the trademark he'd stolen, the company he'd built on my work, the products he was selling with her face, every bit of it was built on intellectual property that didn't belong to him. I called my lawyer, not the old one, a new one, a woman named Carla who specialized in business litigation and had a streak of pure vengeance in her smile. She read the prenup twice, looked up, and said, "He's screwed. If those formulas are yours, we can bury him." We started gathering evidence, timestamps, lab notes, emails, ingredient lists. Everything that proved I was the sole creator. I spent nights in that lab like a ghost, pulling hard drives and backups, labeling evidence. Every file was another bullet in my arsenal. But then he found out. To this day, I don't know how. Maybe someone on my team talked. Maybe he still had access to my email. But one morning, I came into the lab and every cabinet was empty. Samples, prototypes, binders, all gone. A letter sat on my desk, his handwriting. "Don't do this, you'll destroy yourself. Remember, I still know what's in your past." That line, those 7 words. At first, I didn't even know what he meant. Then I realized he was talking about my patent filings. The ones I'd started before our marriage, but hadn't fully submitted until after. Technically, that could make ownership murky. He was threatening to twist it, to make it look like I'd falsified the filings. When I called him, shaking with rage, he didn't deny it. He just said, "It's all business, babe, don't make it personal." "Business?" I hissed. "You stole from me, you humiliated me, you replaced me." He laughed. That same smug, quiet laugh that made my skin crawl. "I didn't replace you. You were never built for this world. You make things, you don't sell them. She sells them, she's what you could never be." That night, I found out the worst part. They were engaged. I saw it in a magazine article, her showing off a diamond ring, talking about finding love and success through creation. My creation. My brand, my formulas. He'd taken my company, turned it into their love story, and turned me into the bitter ex who couldn't handle success. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to end him, legally, surgically, publicly. He thought I'd crumble under his threats, but he had no idea what was coming, because I had one more secret, something even he didn't know existed. Something that would make that prenup clause look like child's play. I didn't sleep for 3 days after I saw their engagement article. Every cell in my body buzzed with fury and humiliation. I was a ghost in my own life, walking through the ruins of my work, my marriage, my name. But ghosts have one advantage: they see everything. So I started watching. Quietly. I created a new email under a fake name and signed up for every mailing list connected to his new company. Every press release, every announcement, every collab request, I archived it. The more I read, the clearer it became. He had no idea how deep his theft went. He thought all I had were my formulas. He didn't realize I'd documented everything. See, every product we ever made had lab reports filed under my initials. Every stability test, every supplier email, every ingredient verification had my signature. I'd built that brand brick by brick, and my digital footprint was everywhere. But the real weapon wasn't the data. It was something he didn't even know existed: the prototype ledger. 2 years before the launch, when I was still a one-woman operation, I kept a handwritten logbook for every formula I mixed. Old-school style ink, not digital. I did it because it made me feel grounded, reminded me where I came from. That book had everything: the exact formulations, ingredient sources, trial dates, and my handwritten notes about results. And it was dated and notarized. I'd done that because I was paranoid about getting ripped off by a supplier. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd need it to destroy my husband. That book was proof. Solid, legal, undeniable proof that I was the sole creator of everything that built his empire. So I started building my case in secret. Carla, my lawyer, told me to stay quiet. "He's expecting a confrontation," she said. "Don't give him one, let him think you're defeated." So I did. I disappeared. No posts, no appearances. Even stopped showing up at the lab. He thought I'd gone into hiding. He even texted once, "Glad you're taking time to heal. You'll thank me one day." I wanted to throw my phone through the wall. Meanwhile, Carla and I were setting traps. We filed a quiet notice of intent with the patent office, essentially freezing any future registrations tied to my formulas. Then we compiled every time-stamped document that proved chain of creation. But I didn't want to just take him down legally. I wanted to destroy the image he'd built: the power couple narrative, the influencer fantasy, the media darling branding. So I reached out to every client who dropped me. Calmly, professionally. I told them the truth, not gossip, not emotion, just facts. I showed them my lab data, my certificates, my photos. I didn't accuse him. I didn't need to. The evidence did that for me. Within weeks, rumors started swirling. Blogs whispered about stolen formulas. Investors started calling him, asking questions, and just when he began to panic, the trademark office flagged his registration for dispute. He called me then, furious. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." He laughed, the same condescending tone as always. "You can't win this, babe. You signed over the brand. It's mine legally." That's when I told him, "You should really reread the prenup." The silence on the line was pure gold, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Because while I was reclaiming the company, I was also digging into his records, financial statements, tax filings, investor reports. Carla's team found something strange. A payment, $150,000, wired to a private account under her name. The same week he'd restructured the business. At first, I thought it was just a bribe. But when I saw where the money came from, my stomach turned to ice. It wasn't business money. It was from my trust account, the one he wasn't supposed to touch without my consent. He had forged my signature. And that forged transfer. It connected him to something way bigger than I realized. Because the account he wired it to wasn't hers. It was someone else's entirely. When Carla's forensic accountant traced the $150,000 transfer, I expected it to lead straight to her, his perfect little influencer, the one who had the face. But it didn't. The account belonged to his ex-wife. Yeah, the one he swore was toxic, manipulative, and out of his life for good. The woman he'd told me drained him financially, cheated on him, and left him broken. Turns out, none of that was true. Carla pulled more threads. Within 2 days, we uncovered a paper trail that made my stomach churn: deposits, withdrawals, offshore wires, all showing the same pattern. He'd been funneling money from my company into his ex-wife's account for nearly a year. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Why her? Why now? Then I saw the memo line on one of the transactions. For the deal. Carla's team found the rest soon after, a set of shell corporations in Delaware and Nevada, all linked back to his ex. They weren't separate ventures. They were holding entities for my brand. He hadn't just stolen my company. He'd been moving it offshore under her name, probably to protect it in case the prenup blew up in his face. He was setting up a fallback, a clean slate, where he and his ex could legally own everything while leaving me ruined. The mistress wasn't his partner. She was a decoy. That's when the pieces started to click into place: the timing, the media push, the fake engagement story. It wasn't love. It was cover. A distraction to keep me chasing the wrong enemy while he buried the real one in paperwork and offshore accounts. He wasn't building a new brand. He was laundering my legacy. When I confronted him, I couldn't hold back anymore. He didn't even try to deny it. He just looked at me with that detached calm he always had and said, "You were never supposed to find that. You could have walked away quietly, kept your lab, your dignity. But you had to dig, didn't you?" I said. "You used me, every part of me." He shrugged. "I used what was available. You're talented, but you don't understand leverage. That's why you'll always lose." Then he leaned in close, so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and whispered, "The face, the mistress, she's nothing, the ex, she's business. But you," he smiled, cold, empty. "You're the product." That word made me feel sick. He'd built the entire brand, the science, the story, the marketing around me. My ethic, my obsession, my clean girl origin. The new company still used my biography, just twisted into something that sounded like hers. He'd turned my identity into an asset. And he'd done it all with such precision that for a moment, I almost admired the evil in it. Almost. But that admiration lasted about 5 seconds, just long enough for the rage to hit full force. I realized then that destroying him wasn't just about reclaiming what he stole. It was about exposing what he was. Because this wasn't a businessman. This was a man who preyed on talented women, used their work, drained their spirit, then left them bankrupt and blamed. And I had proof. Emails, transaction logs, shell documents, even private messages between him and his ex planning asset migration. When Carla saw it all laid out, she looked at me and said, "We're not just going after your company anymore. We're going after his entire portfolio." And that's when she told me something that made my pulse spike. If we played this right, not only could I get my company back, we could own everything he thought he'd hidden. Every house, every account, every dollar that had ever passed through my formulas. It was the perfect setup for revenge. But before we could strike, I needed to understand why. Why he did all this, the theft, the manipulation, the humiliation. Because people don't destroy everything they touch without a reason. And when I found out his, it made my blood run cold. When you've lived beside someone for years, eaten dinner with them, slept next to them, trusted them, you start to believe you know the shape of their soul. You think if they hurt you, it's out of weakness or pride or fear, something human. But when I found out why he did it, it wasn't human. It was methodical, calculated. Carla's team kept digging through his emails and private accounts while prepping the lawsuit. One night she called me and said, "You need to see this in person." I went to her office in downtown LA. She slid a laptop across the table. On the screen were dozens of emails, all from him, all to the same contact. Subject lines, next one identified, need funding for transfer, IP ownership strategy, the recipient, his ex-wife. The content made my skin crawl. They'd been running a scheme together for years. He'd find women like me, smart, ambitious, creative, the kind who could build something but didn't have enough money to protect it. He'd romance them, invest, help them scale, get involved legally, and then, when the business started making money, he'd pull the same playbook. Trademark transfer, ownership shift, asset siphoning. His ex-wife was the handler. She'd move the stolen companies offshore, liquidate assets, sell off IP to investors overseas, and launder the money back through shell corporations in her name. He wasn't just a manipulative husband. He was a serial predator of women entrepreneurs. And I wasn't his first victim. I was his third. Carla found records of two other women, one who'd built a small wellness brand in Portland, another who'd started a handmade fragrance line in Austin. Both had lost everything in amicable divorces. Both brands had been quietly absorbed into corporations registered under his ex-wife's name. He'd used the same pattern: romance, invest, co-found, steal. But here's the part that gutted me. In one of the emails, he wrote about me. "She's more disciplined than the others. Might take longer to break her. But she's worth it. Her formulas are gold. If she resists, we'll run the public transition narrative again." That phrase, "run the public transition," referred to what they were doing now. Using the mistress as a front, making the handover look like a rebrand, so it wouldn't look like theft. It wasn't personal to him. I wasn't special. I was inventory. Every moment I'd thought was love, the late nights, the "I believe in you," the "we're building something together," had been a performance. He'd studied me like a mark. When I finally stopped reading, I just sat there staring at the screen, feeling my entire history with him dissolve into something mechanical. He hadn't fallen out of love. He'd never been in it. Carla said quietly, "He does this because it works. Women like you trust. You build. He strips you for parts." It hit me then that his cruelty wasn't about ego, it was about control. He didn't just want to take what I made, he wanted to erase me from it. He wanted to own the idea of me while I disappeared. That's what made it monstrous. He had built a system around consuming women's ambition and turning it into profit. And now, for the first time, that system had cracks, because I had evidence. Every email, every fake wire, every stolen asset. Enough to expose him, ruin his ex's network, and take back every cent they made off me and the women before me. But I didn't just want to win. I wanted him to feel seen. I wanted the world to know exactly what kind of man he was, not just a thief, but a predator hiding behind a luxury brand and a smile. So when Carla asked, "Do you want to settle quietly or make it public?" I said, "Oh, we're going public." And I meant global. The morning the story broke, he was on a talk show. I watched from my kitchen, coffee in one hand, my phone buzzing nonstop. As he sat beside his fiancée, grinning, talking about their shared vision for sustainable beauty. He wore his favorite navy suit, the one he always used to wear for investor meetings. Confident, composed, every inch the golden boy. Then the host interrupted. She said, "Before we continue, we need to address some recent allegations regarding your company's ownership and intellectual property. Our team has reviewed new documents provided by a whistleblower." That word, whistleblower, made him flinch. The screen split. On one side, his smug face. On the other, a headline flashing across national news outlets. Luxury skincare CEO accused of fraud, identity theft, and exploiting female founders. Underneath were screenshots, emails, bank transfers, contracts, all the evidence Carla and I had fed to a journalist we trusted. Not tabloids, real press. Investigative, fact-checked. The story hit like an earthquake. Within hours, investors froze his assets. The stock tanked. His ex-wife's shell companies were subpoenaed. The mistress, the face, deleted her social media and vanished. By that evening, every major outlet was covering it. But the best part? The lawsuit. Carla filed it the same day the story dropped, federal level, multiple counts. Fraud, IP theft, money laundering, emotional abuse, breach of fiduciary duty. And because of the prenup clause, everything tied to my formulas, every product they ever sold, legally reverted back to me. I didn't just take back my company, I took everything he built on my back. He called that night, I don't even know why I answered. Maybe I wanted to hear him break. He didn't yell, didn't apologize. Just said, "You destroyed me." I said, "No, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you." He hung up. Within a month, his accounts were frozen. His properties, all of them, were under investigation. His ex-wife fled the country. The mistress tried to rebrand as a victim of manipulation, but no one believed her. And me, I rebuilt. I renamed the company Real Chemistry because that's what it was always supposed to be. Honest, raw mine. I launched a campaign with one message only, made by the woman who refused to be erased. Orders poured in. My inbox flooded with messages from women, founders, creators, scientists, all saying the same thing. Thank you for fighting back. I didn't become rich overnight, but I got something better. I got my name back. My work. My peace. 6 months later, he was indicted. Turns out my lawsuit was only the beginning. The other women came forward too. He's facing federal charges now: wire fraud, forgery, misappropriation of funds. Sometimes I still see his face in old press clippings. He looks smaller now. Hollow. Like someone who finally realized there's no formula for rebuilding what you destroy. The night I got the final court ruling, full restitution, ownership reinstated, I opened a bottle of champagne alone in my lab. Same place it all began. I walked over to the window, looked out at the city that had once made me feel invisible, and whispered, "You said she had the face and I had the work ethic." I smiled. Well, the work won. And it really did.